All right, this morning as we pick up on I think a lesson that's going to be important to all of us. It's a lesson about the heat that was turning up. In fact, I've called this lesson "When the Heat is Turning Up," and it's about the time that was not too long after Jesus had died, and Peter, the outspoken leader of the disciples, wrote his first letter to all the churches that had been started by Paul and him and all the others. And in it, he gives some advice. He gives some advice to them to get ready for what's coming. Uh, I thought this morning that I would just pause for a moment. We're so glad to have John with us today, coming from basically an intensive care kind of room there at the hospital. John's been a faithful follower and lover of Christ in our church, in our class. And I thought, John, would you just bring a word of that you shared before of kind of your pilgrimage as a Christian? John was born, he said, in Turkey. It was in a military family. And I said, well, we're going to be talking about your part of the world. So, John, say a word of greeting to the class.
Well, I'm proud to be here and I'm happy to know all of you. As I was telling Bill earlier, I accepted Christ in my life very young. My mother was a very good member of the Methodist Church originally, so I grew up with faith, and I put my faith and trust in Lord way early, and He has led me and protected me every day. I've gone through many challenges, as you know, with my health, and He has held my hand and walked with me every step of the way. And I put all my trust in Him, and I feel good about that. Here about a year ago, I was in the same ICU unit. It was touch and go, and I just laid there and put all my faith in God, and I felt His presence, making sure I was going to make it through every day. And that's when I started. I was in my room one day, and I saw the sun coming up, and I said a prayer, thankful to see the sun come up that day. And I can tell you honestly, I say that prayer every morning since then, just to see another day and thankful for Him leading me to where I'm at.
Well, John, I was impressed when you told me that I think the doctors told you that with your heart condition that they didn't think you'd live there. What was that deal?
They said I was born with aortic stenosis. It's a real narrowing of the aortic valve of the heart. And they said I would never, told my parents I would never make it to live old enough to even walk. And I beat that odd, and I fought it ever since, and I put my faith. And I tell you, I've faced many health challenges when they said there's no hope, and all of a sudden I come out with plenty of hope and faith because I don't give up. I don't. And I mean, Ralph and Les know how much I put my faith in the Lord, and I trust Him for everything.
Well, John, on behalf of the whole class, I want to say thank you for that wonderful testimony. You know, it just gives me encouragement and hope and makes me inspired to keep on. And I just love it when folks say, "Well, you're not going to make it," just as soon as they down to give up, and then here you are, an old bald guy just like me. I think that's a kind of word from guys like you that help the faith grow from its infancy to spread all over the world, not because of some super duper guy, but because of guys who are faithful under pressure and ladies who are faithful under pressure, whatever that pressure was. Thank you, John, for your sharing. We really appreciate it and look forward to you getting out of the hospital in just a day or two. That's
Yes,
we have to go get these patch jobs, but you're used to it.
sounds great. Thank you for allowing me to speak, Bill.
Well, this morning we're going to talk about a lot of Johns who've been out there spreading the word, just in just a simple word that the Holy Spirit takes and puts in our hearts and our minds, and it changes our lives. Um, we have many good reasons these days to be under stress and to be under anxiety. In fact, some of us are under tremendous anxiety and stress and unrest that we're not even aware of. I mean, there's so much going on around us that our subconscious is collecting all this stuff, and we're saying to ourselves, not out loud, not sitting around moaning about it, but there's something going on in us that just makes us uneasy. No wonder there's so many heart troubles and so many other sicknesses physically because of our psychological stress. And it's only getting worse. And I don't mean this morning to spread doom. I'm going to, in fact, talk just about the opposite. But I think we do need to face reality. These are hard times. In fact, I went online to say, as of today, what are the top 10 stressors? What are the top 10 things that's causing us to feel unrest and anxiety that are hanging above us all the time? And you know what that got? Here are the same, almost everybody who talked about it said these are the top 10 things. One is the conflict in the Middle East. All of these different conflicts, because this is such a holy, strategic place. Secondly, the rapid declining moral environment related to the media and related to faith. Three is the threat of World War III, the superpowers of China, Russia, United States, North Korea, all of these bearing nuclear weapons. There is a fear of World War III starting. And then worse than that, number four, people say there's unrest and anxiety because of the Israeli and Ukrainian war that's spreading into Lebanon, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and it's just beginning to spread everywhere. And then some people are afraid that one of these countries will go nutty and there'll be a nuclear attack. That some people even are worried about the fact that this may be the end of the planet. Whenever you start blowing up things with nuclear weapons, it may cause radiation and so forth. And so there's this fear that, this may be the end of it all. Science fiction people love to prey on us. And maybe it's not even science fiction anymore. Number five, they say economic inequality. It is true in our United States. There's a lot of, especially among the common people, there's a lot of unrest because of the economic inequality, but especially the marginalized groups around the world are causing a lot of unrest for the rest of us. Also, the fear and the confusion of the possibility of a serious climate crisis. The media has made it very, very scary because we think about those things. We see pictures. Seven, the fear of, I'm sorry, that was seven. Number 8 is the pandemic recovery and recurrence. COVID does not seem to want to go away. And in some areas, the hospitals are beginning to fill up again. There's also all these new strains, and people have this subconscious fear that maybe this pandemic is going to increase. There's also the fear of immigration that's causing all kinds of troubles, especially in the United States, but we don't read about the migration problems around the world, especially in South America and also in the Middle East. And then the last one is there a disturbing political polarization, which has to do with the fact there's a great amount of clash between ideologies and religions. Some parts of the world and in ours, there's a lot of terrorism and protesting and all that's going on related to different ideologies, different religions, and it's becoming extremely critical in some areas. Well, when you put all these things together, can you imagine what is being stored in our minds and in the minds of little children and parents? What I'm saying is there is a unusual accumulation of reasons to have unrest and anxiety. And it is our place as Christians to take care of one another and to take care of ourselves to face these kind of things. Now, as I looked at that, I say, what can you say if there's somebody in this room who not only subconsciously, but consciously, there's somebody here who's worried about all this and who's maybe their children or grandchildren are worrying about this and they're restless and they need to talk about it. What do you say to these people? What do you do in this kind of time to face all of this? Well, I got to thinking that the letters of Peter, first, second, and third uh, letters of Peter, Peter was speaking about a very similar time in a much less volatile world, but it was a similar thing. If you remember, Peter being, of course, the charismatic, outspoken, um, very, very volatile kind of fellow, that finally, as he grew older, became more settled down, but still was a tremendous charismatic leader. In fact, all the historians who write about him talk about him being the leader of leaders. He was a pastor in Rome, which was kind of the headquarters in the early days because of the Roman Empire. He was a key leader, and he would spend much of his time traveling to speak to other pastors and lay groups and large groups. Uh, but you know, the interesting thing about them, they said he was not the kind of guy who was tried to be a popular person. He liked to work with crowds, small crowds. He liked to work with individuals. He came very close to people. He was known as the humble preacher, the humble pastor. And as a pastor in Rome, he had the opportunity because of both means of communication, but also because of the highway roads and all, made it easy for him to have people come to him and for him to go to them. Peter began to write and to speak and to try and get the people ready for what was to come. In 64 AD, what you realize is only a little more than 30 years after Jesus died and rose again, Christianity had spread. Followers of Christ became known not long after that as Christians, people who were followers of Christ. They were classified as a distinct group. And in 64 AD, Nero was at that time the emperor. And you remember he was, some would say he was not only an egotist, he was probably a complete narcissist who only thought of himself. And he got to the point where the empire was getting so wealthy that he did not like Rome because the buildings were old and dirty and so forth. And he decided he wanted to have a new one. He wanted to rebuild Rome and build the whole thing around him with statues of him, buildings named after him. So guess what he did? Historians say he burned Rome down. He started one of the main buildings in the center of Rome and had people put it on fire, and it caught and spread throughout the districts. There are 14 districts around central Rome, and out of the 14, this fire caught on and spread to 10 of them, burning them nearly to the ground, leaving only the stones. So Nero did a good job of destroying Rome. For some historians, we don't know whether it's true or not, some historians said that he sat on the tallest building and played a fiddle watching Rome burn. We don't know if that's true or not, but the characterization of Nero is that this narcissist was determined to destroy Rome for his own personal gain. And you know what happened? In 64 AD, it wasn't long before that Nero himself died. And a new emperor came along named Domitian, who was worse than Nero in terms of persecution of Christians. Nero was able to get the Roman law to pass that being a Christian was illegal. Anyone who was considered a Christian, who claimed to be a Christian, was imprisoned. And Peter, therefore, was the first one to go. He was there in prison. And when he wrote his letter, he talked about that he was in the prison in Babylon. Well, to him, Babylon being the old empire of the world, he was symbolically talking about Rome. Peter was in prison in Rome, and he decided things under Domitian were going to get worse and worse. They were going to get so bad that he was going to need to get the people prepared. So what did he do? He called in the elders, he called them, which is just a new word for leaders. I know we use that word elder to mean something like official people in the church. Well, that's not what he was talking about. He was talking about the leaders. Most of them, of course, and practically all of them were leaders who were lay people, as we call them, common folks, people who had no seminary training, probably no theological training. They were carpenters and farmers and shepherds and merchants and so forth, but they'd come to Christ. And so they became leaders in the church. And so he called these leaders together. And in the letter, he says it's to all the leaders in the five key districts in the area. That's a good part of Europe and into Asia Minor. He called leaders, in other words, from all over that part of the world, and he gathered them together, and he talked to those he could, and then sent this letter out to the rest of them as instruction of how to get ready for the increased amount of persecution they were going to have. In the first letter, he writes these 5 chapters in this first letter. The first chapter through the 4th chapter, he describes the kind of persecution that's going to happen. And in detail, he talks about things they need to do as leaders to help their people get ready for the persecution. You'd be surprised when you look at them. They're not like the kind of things you would see today where they'd be talking about building war articles and building buildings and building strongholds and all that. No, he talked about things you need to do personally. And interesting things in all 4 chapters. When he gets to chapter 5, and he summarizes what he said in chapters 1 through 4. So this morning, we're going to take a look at what he said as a summary of what we should do when the heat starts turning up in our home, in our country, in our world. What should we do as Christians to do what God would want us to do? So I want to teach a little bit about this and get you involved in it. But to begin, I'd like us just to hear what he said. Now, I hope you have your Bibles that you could follow along, but if you just want to listen closely at first, I've asked Phyllis to read it from the Message. I read it from the New Living Translation again. I read it from the NIV again, and I read it from the Message again. And I know that probably the NLT has the most, what I think is the most accurate translation from the Greek. But I think the Message is the most clearly communicating the idea and the theme. And he's pretty close to the Greek, too, from my opinion. So, Phyllis, would you read this chapter 5? And let's everybody listen to it as if he were talking to you as a leader in your family or in your church. And here's what he's talking to you about. Phyllis?
Peter writes, I have a special concern for you church leaders. I know what it's like to be a leader, in on Christ's sufferings as well as the coming glory. Here's my concern, that you care for God's flock with all the diligence of a shepherd, not because you have to, but because you want to please God, not calculating what you can get out of it, but acting spontaneously, not bossily telling others what to do, but tenderly showing them the way. When God, who is the best shepherd of all, comes out in the open with his rule, he'll see that you've done it right, and commend you lavishly. And you who are younger must follow your leaders. But all of you, leaders and followers alike, are to be down to earth with each other. For God has had it with the proud, but he takes delight in just plain people. So be content with who you are and don't put on airs. God's strong hand is on you, and he'll promote you at the right time. Live carefree before God. He is most careful with you. Keep a cool head. Stay alert. The devil is poised to pounce and would like nothing better than to catch you napping. Keep your guard up. You're not the only ones plunged into these hard times. It's the same with Christians all over the world. So keep a firm grip on your faith. The suffering won't last forever. It won't be long before this generous God, who has great plans for us in Christ, eternal and glorious plans they are, will have you put together and on your feet for good. He gets the last word. Yes, he does. I'm sending this brief letter to you by Silas, a most dependable brother. I have the highest regard for him. I have written as urgently and accurately as I know how. This is God's generous truth. Embrace it with both arms.
Thank you, Phyllis. Well, you know, as we look at these words, if you kind of go over them a number of times, some things start popping out. Peter is talking now. Remember, he's talking from the prison. He's writing from the prison, and he's writing to leaders as the leader that they look up to, the main leader they look up to. And he knows he's speaking to people from all walks of life. And so he's not speaking to people who are full-time professional preachers or pastors and that sort of thing. He's talking to people who have small home churches, their house churches, churches that are in either their home or in some civic facility. I remember a few years back, in fact, it's more years than I want to say, I remember when a friend of ours named Otto Arango, he was a Mexican nationalist who lived here in America, went to school here. In fact, he got his doctor's degree in theology, but his heart was always in Mexico. Otto loved the people from Mexico. He loved them from his heritage, and he went down there often to preach. He was an outstanding preacher, but he was even better teacher, tremendous teacher. Otto went down there and found out that one of the big problems of preaching is that people in Mexico at that time, from all over Mexico, were hungry for the gospel. I mean, by that I mean he would go into this town, he would find some pastor, and that pastor would gather other pastors from other groups, and they would say, let's have a big meeting. And so they would form a sort of a promotion committee, and all these people would invite people to come and hear him preach. And he's kind of like you've seen other evangelists do. The crowds would come, he would preach. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people would come forward and say they want to either come to know Christ or they'd want to learn more. They needed something. They were desperate for some kind of spiritual guidance. They were sick of all their kind of religion and spooky spiritualism that they were involved in. And so he said that people would come forward. They would have local teachers and preachers to help these people, but they had no place to go. That many of these people just didn't have anybody trained to help them. So Otto, one time, Phyllis and I got to know him. And after a while, Otto began to plead, what we need to be able to train some people so like Jesus, they could spread those people out to train other people. and then it would multiply. Well, we thought it was a pretty good idea, frankly. So we said, well, what we need to do is find some people that could do this full time. We said, well, we need some money. Do you know God supplied a man named Paul Piper, who was a multimillionaire, and he decided that he loved people. He loved soul winning, but he couldn't talk worth a flip. And so we went to him, Otto and Phyllis and me, and in a summary way, he decided to give us what funds we needed. He gave us thousands of dollars to hire people like Otto for full time, so we wouldn't have to do this part time, and other expenses, and began to set up groups down in Mexico. And do you know what happened, to make this long story short? Over a period of a year, went in 2 years and so forth, we saw hundreds of churches who then multiplied into other churches. I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't thousands of churches established. And you say, oh, isn't that wonderful? Now, don't get in your mind, they started First Methodist Church of Bernie. These hundreds of churches were basically small groups in homes, in houses, in community centers, under a tree, all over Mexico. Now, here was the problem. Who in the world was going to teach them? They needed a Bible. They needed some resources. We could provide the Bible, but we couldn't provide the people. We didn't have money for buildings. We decided, well, let's do it the way Paul did. Paul went down, he'd have a meeting. People would come, maybe 5, 6. And guess what? They'd start a church. The word church in Greek, of course, just means called out, a small group called out, maybe 3, 4, 5, 10. And you know what Paul would do? He'd start a church in some little part of town or some small town. And they'd say, well, ask the Holy Spirit to put it on somebody's heart to become the teacher. You mean they didn't have to go to seminary? They didn't have to go to college? They didn't have to get a degree? Well, who in the world is going to listen to those people? Guess what? Half of the people we had to become pastors in those little old churches, half of them were women. Men wouldn't step up to the plate. The women become pastors. They'd become teachers. They teach the Bible. They would meet in the homes day and night. They didn't just do it on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. Sometimes they'd do it during the week when the people could come. Sometimes they'd do it at night because they were working all day long. So what I'm saying is, in the same way that this organization we formed started forming churches, Peter was doing the same thing. He was stuck in prison, and he knew that they must continue to support all these hundreds and thousands of churches that were multiplying. And you know why Christianity multiplied? From just a small handful of disciples that Jesus had to literally millions of people. It didn't grow that fast because there was some great Billy Graham out there. It grew because there were hundreds and thousands of ordinary people like Philip and Peter, a fisherman, and all those fellows and women who actually taught the Bible in small groups. The source of the great growth of Christianity across the world has been small groups learning about the ways of Christ and multiplying into other small groups. And you know what? Here's some of the things that Peter said you need to do, because the Roman Empire, in his mind, the Roman Empire, now the ruler of the world, was going to crush Christianity. I look at these 10 things that are stressing people, that are causing us to have anxiety, and I'm saying to myself, you know, we need to hear what Peter's got to say. And in his summary, chapter 5, Peter tells us, what do you tell people who need to know what to do for their family and for their fellowship of believers in their church or their small group? And if you see here, I've just, to make it a brief summary kind of lesson, I thought I would look at some key verses in chapter 5 that tell us what we should do, but also what we can do. Now, I want you to think about it this way. Here are the things that Peter is saying to these people, people just like you, people who want to be leaders in the spiritual realm. No, maybe they can't be a leader in the physical world. Maybe they can't be a senator, a representative, a strong multimillionaire, but they can be a spiritual leader in their neighborhood or in their home or at their job and get ready for all these things that are coming upon us. Because what if the worst happens among all these things? We need to be ready. So what are the things that they can do? And here's what I discern from this. Follow me if you can. Here's some practices that Peter suggests that we need to do. Number one, if you see there on that blank sheet of paper, that sheet of paper with blanks on it, he says the first thing that we should practice that we need to do is to volunteer when it's not expected. He says, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be. If you read the full context around that, he's saying, here's the way you need to be in order to act. You need to be willing. You need to be saying, I want to do this. Tell me what you want, and that's what I'll do. Peter realized that the first element, if you're going to ever be able to handle things, is to just be willing. You know, I've found that is the truth in the spiritual world, that the greatest people I've ever seen in my life are the people who are willing to use whatever they got. It's not because they're so gifted. It's because they're willing to let God use in their situation when people come along to use what they have. What do you have? What is it that you have or that you do or that you enjoy, that you're capable of? What is it you got that you can use in the face of hard times? Maybe the hard times are not just yours. Maybe it's theirs. That's what Peter's talking about here. He's looking for us to step up with what we're able to do. You know what I found? The difference between a leader and a non-leader. A leader wants to do something. Non-leaders want to discuss it. Leaders want to help. Non-leaders want to have a meeting or form a committee and discuss it. Evaluate it to death. I won't go in that any farther because we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to ask you, would you think about today, in the face of people around you, not just to go out willy-nilly, but to look at your own life and to say, what is God, who is God put in my path, who maybe is uneasy, who's maybe stressed out because of something, I don't know what. And he's put that person in your path or that family, and he wants you to be willing to use whatever you've got to give some unexpected praise, some expected something to help that person lighten their load. When that happens, it's just like this morning hearing John's testimony. You know, you don't know John. You didn't wake up this morning and think you're going to share that testimony and it was going to be a blessing to somebody sitting out here thinking, well, if John can have that kind of attitude, what about me? What I'm saying is, when you're willing, God will put you in the right place. So think about it. What can I do to volunteer to somebody something that doesn't expect it? The second thing we can do, and you fill in the blank there if you want, volunteer when it is not expected. The second one is to give something away. Well, that sounds pretty simple. Listen to what Peter says. Not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve. If you look at the context, he's talking about most people just spend their money, spend everything they got in order to get something back. He's talking about if you're going to face these tough times, get ready to lend a hand. Get ready to give something. I don't care how small it is. I don't care how inexpensive it is. Let God lead you to find something you have, not something that you don't need at all that you could just throw in the trash, something that you have. It may be perishable, may be food, it may be an object, it may be money, it may be, I don't know, just a word out of your mouth. Give something away that you are not trying to gain something by. You're not investing it to get something physically back. You know, I wonder if we got to looking at it, how much do we go out of our way to do that we're not doing it so we can get something in return? Peter's saying we need to be like Christ, to give not because it's going to help us, but as Peter says here, be eager to serve. Eager to serve. I want you to think about that, some act of kindness that cost you, and to give it to somebody else this week. Thirdly, he says if you want to get ready, you got to bless someone not deserving of it. Here's what he says, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples. In the context, Peter is talking about that we need to be the kind of people who don't say things ugly because people are ugly. We don't do things ugly because people are ugly. We don't treat people like Jesus said. We don't treat people the way they treated us. We treat people so they can see that there's something different, that God is in our lives. I'm asking you, if you want to face difficult times, it's got to change your heart. Somehow your heart is not got to be a reactor to evil, violence, destruction. Your heart's got to say, I'm going to do that which is good. I'm going to do that which people say, I can't believe this guy's being nice to me when I haven't been very nice. I can't believe this nurse has been so nasty, and yet I'm going to turn around and I'm going to be kind to her. I can't believe this neighbor's that way. He's wanting you to show something. What we're doing, Peter says, if we're going to face these hard times, is not become one of them. To not let us become evil as evil is on us. For us to be like Jesus, a blessing to those who hurt us. So this week, I'm asking you to find somebody who maybe nobody else likes. Somebody who's not that kind, and to be kind to them. Do something kind, something simple. And then as the heat turns up, people are going to see you and they're going to think, this has to be of Christ. This is not normal. I could tell you about a fella just happened in his life. He came close to Jesus, and now he's one of the nicest people you could meet. And not long ago, he was angry. His words and his attitude was angry. But now he's sweet and gentle. And people have to say, what's happened? What's happened here? Well, it's obvious. He met Jesus. Jesus changes. How are people going to know? Peter's saying, when the heat turns up, people are going to know you're one of his. It's going to change them. They're going to want more of him. If they see in you somebody who blesses people who don't deserve it. Number 4, look, Peter says, be humble and serve someone in need. He says, clothe yourself with humility towards one another. So the 4th thing we can do is to humble ourselves before someone. Humbly serve someone in need. I think that's the whole idea of setting an example of how a leader lifts people up and doesn't add to the load. You know, when all these hard times come, people are going to look for people. They're going to look for people. And I want to tell you what, people don't want to be around people who just keep repeating the same old junk. People who just keep lighting the fire hotter, who keep adding to the problem, telling everybody how bad things is. You know, if you get in a discussion about how bad things are in the Middle East or how bad things are in our government, how much is that adding? I think one of my problems is I'm so disgusted with some of the moral things and some of the political things that are going on all over the country that I don't add a lot to it, the good. I think this is a good time to use that conjunction but. When people say, well, things are going to, I think you and I need to say what Moses said so often and what, well, it's all the way through the Bible. But on the other hand, let me tell you what I saw. Let me tell you about some people. I was talking to a fella a while back, and he was talking about how bad it was. And I said, but you know what? I've seen some people who are out helping in that situation. Some people who are giving up their time and their money and their effort. And you know what? Those people are the people of God. They come from a small church. You know, somebody needs to bring a flashlight into the darkness. Are you a flashlight bearer? Or are you just bringing in more darkness? The fifth thing, Peter says, is to demonstrate inner peace in the face of stress. He put it this way: cast all your anxiety, that's your worries, cast all of your worries on him. You know the point. In all 4 chapters in First Peter, before he come to number 5, he must have said this over and over again about casting your anxieties. All of that stuff you're carrying around that's getting you sick, it's making you an angry person. He said, cast all your anxieties, all of your worries on him. In other words, what he's talking about is spiritual leaders exhibit a peacefulness while everybody else is frantic. Let me ask you something. Can you think of a time to be frantic? Can you think of a time to just, oh my goodness, look what's happening. I don't know how we're going to handle it. This is a mess. This is horrible. Isn't it nice? I know I've been in the hospital when things really look bad. John, have you been there? When things really look bad? Are you looking for somebody to come tell you how bad it is? No, you've already heard that 10 times. You're looking, will somebody come in this room and tell me, yes, but let me tell you something. Let me bring some light into this situation. What a peace it brings to our heart and our minds when somebody can bring some peace and confidence. I know that's the one thing. When I was a young man and I went into chaplaincy training, you know the one thing that old guy told me, that longtime chaplain, he said, folks, don't carry the problems from next door into the room you're going in. Go in there with a new set of smile, a new peaceful spirit. Don't bring them more problems. And I learned this, that when I was hopeful as a young chaplain, I have to say, I have to admit, I have to confess, sometimes I was kind of having to put it on because I thought I was miserable about this whole situation. But I learned when I could be calm in the midst of panic, when people were running around like a chicken with their head cut off, if I could be calm, if I could be peaceful, there came a peace. Sometimes families, when someone dies, everybody's running around. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? They need somebody who can say, it's going to be all right. I don't know how, but God's with us. It's going to be all right. Oh, they may not get it right at that moment, but when they're alone, they start thinking, boy, I think this is right. Let me ask something. Will you be when the crisis comes, when the bomb hits, when the invasion happens? when the plague gets worse, will you be one to run around like a chicken with his head cut off? Or will you be that one peaceful soul who shows some kind of sense of patience and confidence? In fact, that's what the next one's about. He says, not only demonstrate inner peace in the face of stress, but he says, show confidence by consistency. Listen to this. Be alert. That means show confidence. And of sober mind. That means stability. In this whole thing, Paul summarizes those 4 chapters in here by what he's saying is, whenever these crises get worse, when the persecution really gets bad, when your family members get dragged off, when people are killed, and you say there's this, everything is gone. It's torn the home up, it's torn our lives up. He's saying, what? Show confidence that you still believe God is there. Be consistent, be stable, be grounded. Say to yourself and say to others and show them that you believe he's still the God of life and eternity. Give that sense of, I'm going to do what I said, no matter the circumstance. Let me ask something. Are we supposed to be Christ-like people only when the water is calm? Or are we to be calm like Jesus was when the storm comes? People need to see in us what they saw in Jesus. That I am not going to be frantic. I am going to keep on going to my class. I'm going to keep on praying. I'm going to keep on reading the Bible. I'm going to keep on being consistent. You know, that's one of the things that impressed me. Phyllis was always 10 times better than I was on being stable. Somehow she grew up with this building. If you set yourself a time to do something, you do it. And you know, I think Peter's saying that. If Phyllis had been his friend, he'd say, be like Phyllis. But Jesus was his friend. He said, be like him. If he says he's going to have on the Sabbath, he's going to be here to teach, you can count on him. Even if the whole world blows up, he's going to be there. What am I saying? Is Peter is saying that we need to be people who, as he says, show confidence and show stability and keep on doing the things that I've taught you to do, to pray, meditate on the word, read the word, be in your small group. If you're in a woman's group, you're in a man's group, that's the heart of your faith. Be there, listen to the Spirit, and he will give you confidence and peace. Now, let me ask you a question. As you look back over your life, most of you are not spring chicken. Most of you have been around a while. Let me ask somebody to go first. Who would you say is the person that you remember most as a spiritual leader in your life? Who was the person you looked up to as a spiritual leader in your life? Not a pastor or a priest or some popular figure out there. Somebody in your own personal life that you look up to as you look back. Who'll be first?
I'll be first. It's Joyce. I just have to say my mother, she was a great Christian, but she was so full of wisdom. She's been gone 11 years now, but I still want to pick up the phone so many days and just get a word of wisdom from her. And she was, well, like I said, a great Christian lady too, but and followed these things that you're talking about today. But she helped form me into who I am, and I'm not anywhere near her yet. I have a long ways to go.
I'm very happy to hear that, because that's the key, a mother to a child. Joyce, let me just pick your brain a little more. I can hear that she was a very wise woman and it stuck. But let me ask you, what other quality do you admire? I mean, I'm sure you give us a whole list. Can you tell me another quality about her that has really made her memorable to you?
Well, she was so kind, and she didn't have a lot of money, but she was so kind and gave to others. And I heard her say over her later years, but she never gave me the whole explanation about, well, we had a Friday night prayer meeting when we needed to. And when she passed away at the funeral service, I had 3 different people that came up to me, women that I would have never suspected actually, that said, I don't know what I'd have done without your mother's Friday night prayer meetings. And I just was blown away by that. And then I had a couple of people that wrote me a note like on Facebook and said about Mother's Friday night prayer meetings. And so she never really told me about those, and my other siblings don't know anything at all about it. But mother did just say Friday night prayer meetings, and I thought, well, that's not unusual for mother. That sounds like something she would do. But she was always so kind and just thoughtful and did so much for others. And that's probably the other thing about her, other than her wisdom, that just pops out at me.
It reminds me of some intellectual wrote a really, I can't repeat it because I can't remember those things ever. But the essence of it was people don't ever remember what you said, but they never forget what you do in kindness. And I think that's right on the button. Well, I
Yeah.
know, Blanche, can you give us a brief person that you remember as a spiritual leader in your life that you've always remembered?
Yes, I can. And it was Tony, my soulmate.
Mm-hmm.
He was not only wise, uh, he probably was the wisest person I ever knew in my entire life,
Mm-hmm.
and the best Christian, a very, very quiet Christian. Tony, I guess he loved to help people quietly, didn't talk about it, didn't expect anything in return. After he died, I had several people come up to me and say how much Tony had helped them. I had no idea.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
he was that kind of person, just wanting to help somebody who needed something that he could give. And so he not only gave materially, but he gave tried to share his wisdom,
Yes.
and mostly to encourage young people to better themselves.
I
So
experienced the same thing with Tony. Such a humble, sharing guy who
very.
lifted. Thank you, Blanche. That's exactly what we're talking about here in this list I've been through. Who else had somebody come to their mind now that we've had 2 testimonies?
I would say, Bill, this is Les. I would say Vicky would be mine. In that, I think back when we met and I was kind of out sowing my wild oats, and I could tell she was always spiritually grounded. I mean, she had concrete Christian beliefs that she wasn't going to waver on. I mean, I kept looking, thinking, man, how do you get that?
Mm.
And just watching how over time how she's given her time and everything else to help people and be involved in community type organizations. But like I said, I think it's her unwavering foundation, Christian foundation, that really impressed me, when we first met.
Yeah, I've always told Les, I think we both married way up out of our class. All right. Who else has somebody on your mind that you remember because they had these some particular characteristic that you just can't that made a great impression on you? Who would have somebody in mind?
Well, I'll tell you, Bill, Ralph, I'll mention a really good friend of mine and his wife, primarily Rick and Sandra. In 1986, when I started in the real estate world, he was the first person I met at the job, at a new job. And the morning I met him, he came running in, he was running 2 minutes late, I'd gotten there early. And he walked in, introduced himself, and then he asked me, "Do you know Jesus?"
Oh, wow.
I said, I don't even know you. All right, so what are you talking about? You know, he goes, "Well, come on, we're gonna go start talking, looking around the neighborhood. But you're gonna hear a lot about Jesus." And off we went. And so for the next 20 years, he and his wife just loved on me and fed into me, going through 2 divorces. They never wavered. You know, it was 21 years later that I accepted Christ. And they were right there,
Yep.
you know, and they're there today. They're there to this day.
Amen. Thank you, Ralph. That's great. That's encouraging. Well, our time is up, and I want to say thank you to all you. Phyllis, did you have one? I think you got your speaker.
No, sir, I don't have one, but I was thinking this morning, actually, I started thinking when you mentioned this lesson yesterday, when you're talking about turning up the heat, when you were telling me about that, I thought, oh, he's going to go back to the Old Testament and he's going to tell us the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
He's talking about turning up the heat. 3 men went into that furnace, and I think what I hold on to is that 4th man. As I can't do the things that Peter instructed me to do without that 4th man. And John really blessed my heart this morning with telling us about how Jesus walked in his shoes with him. Jesus walking alongside us, bringing the calm with his presence and his peace that enables us to do those things. So I'm with you, John. I am grateful for my Lord.
Amen. Thank you, Phyllis. That's a great conclusion. Well, I hope you all can be thinking about some of these things Peter's encouraged us to do, and that we would be the kind of people that when we shuffle off the planet, that people will be talking about us. That is a testimony. Ralph, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brother Bill. And I think one thing I learned this morning is that if you pulled this lesson off of your shelf last night, help us. I don't have the right number of shelves or something. You know, sometimes I look at my shelves and there's a bunch of junk on them that I just don't want to throw away. But Bill goes and pulls this lesson off of his shelf, okay, for us. So thank you. And
Yes.
I think you'd be remiss in not recognizing Bill for the spiritual guide he has been to many of us. Several months ago, I called Bill with what I believe was a mass anxiety issue concerning my life, about my children, and where they and what the decisions they made and life where they were. And so Bill said, "Well, let me ask you a few things." And so he went down a list of, and Bill probably doesn't remember this. Bill went down a list of, did they have their health? Do they have a job? Do they have a place to live? Do they have food on their table? Do they have a transportation? I mean, Bill just went down a list of things, and I'm like, yes, yes, yes. That's why I caught on eventually. Okay, what Bill was trying to feed into me, and he says, "Is there anything else?" And I'm like, "No, that's pretty much it, Bill." And Bill's like, "You seem to have a pretty good life, Rob. And they'll be blessed by you being their father, and eventually grandfather." And so, but I have not forgotten that, Brother Bill, and you truly do speak the Spirit into all of us, and we're blessed to have you.
Thank you.
And when you're close connection to Pastor Ricky, please let him know that we're all praying for him and Beverly. And I've shared with the class many times that I am struggling in my heart on the right way to pray for Beverly and for Ricky.
Yes.
And yes,